militia groups and has also announced new sanctions on 7 Iranian officials. John Brennan has told Tonight with Andrew Marr it's clear that extremists in the region are taking advantage of the war in Gaza.
And I think a number of these extremist groups want there to be some type of regional conflict, want to be able to bloody the nose of the United States, given that the United States has taken such a very high-profile role in supporting Israel in terms of its military operations in Gaza. Clearly, I think there is an interest on the part of a lot of these extremist organizations, Islamist organizations, both Sunni and Shia, to be able to strike back against U.S. interests.
The police watchdog is investigating Leicestershire Police over reports of alleged attacks carried out by Valdo Kalakani. The force has referred itself to the IOPC over the accusations made in May 2023, weeks before he killed 3 people in Nottingham. The Prime Minister hasn't ruled out an inquiry into the attacks in June last year. A former British ambassador has told LBC a decision to pause funding to the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees is shocking. The organisation sacked a number of staff following allegations they were part of the October 7th attacks on Israel. Both the US and UK have temporarily halted their support for the organisation. But former British ambassador to Iran, Sir Richard Dalton, says it's inconsistent with our response to Israeli forces' actions in Gaza.
We tolerate incitement to genocide by figures like the Israeli president. We make no condemnation whatsoever of punishment of the whole Gazan population. We utter not a word of disapproval. So it's a completely inconsistent, knee-jerk policy.
Earlier, the Foreign Office Minister told MPs the UK's efforts are focused on getting aid into Gaza. A Public Health Minister has told LBC there are no plans at the moment to make vaping prescription only. The government's announced plans to ban disposable vapes over fears they're making the habit more attractive to under 18s. Andrea Leadsom has told Andrew Marr she doesn't want to put adults off using it as a way of coming off cigarettes.
There are about 50 to 70,000 successful stop smoking attempts every year from the millions of people who still smoke. And those people go out and buy a refillable vape on the whole. So if you made it prescription only, the risk is that you'd actually be narrowing the number of people who would want to sort of go to the doctor, medicalise it, if you like.
A report into the controversial Teesworks development says it's found no evidence to support claims of corruption or illegality. The review did criticise its governance and transparency, saying the panel faced challenges accessing information. The Teesworks and Freeport project aims to redevelop Redcar's former steelworks for green industry. And the King has left hospital 3 days after undergoing surgery on his prostate. His Majesty was seen leaving the London clinic where he was being treated this afternoon. Earlier, Kensington Palace revealed the Princess of Wales has returned home to continue her recovery from abdominal surgery. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 2 points at 76.32. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.17. LBC weather, heavy rain at times for parts of England, Wales and the far south of Scotland tonight. Drier but cold in the northwest, lows of -4. Cloudy for the south and east tomorrow, brighter elsewhere with a few showers in the far northwest, highs of 10 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 4 minutes past 7 on LBC. Welcome to the show. It's Iain Dale with you until 10. Now, we're streaming this hour live on Global Player. The reason is it's our monthly phone-in with the Shadow Chancellor, Labour's Rachel Reeves. Welcome, Rachel.
It's great to be back.
I'm glad. Well, I hope you say that at the end of the hour as well. Now, normally when we do these hours, I spend 10 minutes sort of grilling you on something. I'm not going to do that today because I think I'm just going to go straight to the calls. We've already got loads of calls lined up. If you would like to ask the Shadow Chancellor a question, the number 0345 6060 973. If you can't phone in, you can text 84850 or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. Now, we could be only 3 phone-ins away from a general election, or we could be 9 phone-ins away from a general election. Who knows? But there's so much to talk about on the economic agenda, on the government's record, on what Labour are planning. So do pick up the phone and dial in right now. Let's go to our first question. It's from Georgia in Kensal Rise. Hello, Georgia.
Hi, hello.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
My question is, your 28 billion green investment plan has now become an ambition in recent weeks. This rollback would be obviously short-term in nature, but what about the longer-term implications of climate change, and who would bear the cost? Obviously, we know that climate change knows no time horizon.
Well, thank you very much for phoning in, Georgia, and I totally agree with you that tackling the climate emergency is incredibly important, but so too is securing the good jobs that come from investing in industries of the future, and also the lower bills that will come from investing in renewable, homegrown energy and the energy security it will bring, weaning ourselves off foreign, particularly Russian oil and gas. So that's why the Green Prosperity Plan is so important. But we also know from what the Conservatives have done these last couple of years how important fiscal stability is. And that's why I've made that commitment to never play fast and loose with the public finances, and everything that we do will be subject to the fiscal rules that I've set out, because when you play fast and loose with the public finances, it is ordinary working people who pay the price. So I don't know what economic inheritance we're going to get from the Conservatives if we win the election later this year. Well, we know it's going to be pretty dire. And we know that they are. They've got this sort of strategy of sort of scorched earth, leaving the worst possible inheritance and leave it to the next people to pick up. But we want to invest in these opportunities.
Just
but
on
we'll
that,
do it accordance with the fiscal rules.
That's quite an accusation to make. So you're actually accusing them of wanting or deliberately engineering the economy so it goes down the pan between now and the election. Why would they do that?
Well, if you look at the most recent numbers from the Office for Budget Responsibility, and you look at it's called the fiscal headroom. So that's the allowance for meeting the government's own fiscal rules, and it's the lowest it has been basically in all of the 14 years that the Conservatives have been in office. The last three fiscal events, budgets and autumn statements, they are really scraping at the bottom of what they are allowing in terms of headroom for their successors. So that's what I mean, that they've got this sort of scorched earth policy, spend all the money and then leave it to the next government to pick up the pieces. But
I thought that's what Labour did in 2009. Remember Liam Burns?
Well, the debt now is twice as high than when Labour left office. So it's this government that crashed the economy and have played fast and loose with the public finances. But, Georgia is right that it is incumbent on whoever is in office to tackle not just the short-term challenges, but the long-term ones as well. And that's why we want to make these investments, but we've got to do it in a fiscal responsible way. Otherwise, you end up causing more problems.
When you announced this Green Prosperity Plan, was it 2 to 3 years ago?
It was in the party conference in autumn 2021.
And it was seen as a firm promise that you would introduce it right from day one. Now, since then, it's been watered down. I think Johnny Reynolds called it an ambition on the television yesterday.
If you look at the things that have happened since that announcement, the most key moment was Liz Truss's mini-budget, which put pensions in peril, sent mortgage rates soaring, but also pushed up the costs for government of borrowing. And the government are spending, something like £120 billion just serving the government debt, the debt interest. So, look, the truth is the fiscal inheritance of an incoming Labour government is going to be very different from when I first set out Labour's Green Prosperity Plan. I don't get to choose the inheritance. I have to live with whatever is bequeathed if we have the opportunity to form the next Labour government. Okay. And all of our plans will be within those rules.
Do you accept the messaging on this, though, has been a bit, unusually so, a bit all over the place, and people don't really know exactly what you're planning to do with this? You say, well, it'll be brought in the second half of a parliament, but you can't actually promise that if the argument is, well, we don't know what we're going to inherit.
Well, look, I'm really clear about the scale of our ambition and what we want to do, but everything, whether that's policies in any area, are going to be subject to the fiscal rules. And we've got a budget coming up on the 6th of March. Depending on when the government call the general election, there may be a further budget in the autumn of this year. And it is really important that all of our policies are fully costed and fully funded, including the Green Prosperity Plan.
Let's bring Georgia back in. What do you make of what you've heard, Georgia?
Well, firstly, you didn't answer my question because you've just been talking about the Conservatives. But second of all, I find it really interesting that the plan was developed only 3.5 years ago. I mean, surely this number wasn't plucked out of thin air, and you would have modelled it across various economic assumptions, including
Georgia,
the current situation we're in.
Georgia, you're right. I did not foresee the Liz Truss mini budget that crashed the economy, put pensions in peril and sent mortgage rates soaring. That was the choices that the Conservative made. But it has meant that the economic inheritance for the next government is going to be dire. Now, look, I want to invest in the jobs and the industries of the future. I want to secure for Britain those jobs. I want to bring down bills, and I want to achieve our commitments to get to net zero. We've made a commitment that you will know of to get to clean power by 2030. That is incredibly ambitious, but it's not just about spending money. It's also about reforming the planning system so we can actually get the wind farms built and the energy into our national grid. Things like that can help decarbonise the economy, working with business to secure that investment in the UK to get us to net zero.
But if your argument is, well, we need to borrow to invest, and Emily Thornberry on Question Time the other week said that this would be entirely funded by borrowing, which the audience didn't react very well to. But if that is the argument, well, if we borrow, for every pound that we spend on the Green Prosperity Plan, we'll get 3 back. Why not do it right from the start? Show a bit of bravery.
Well, because, as I've said, all of our policies are subject to the fiscal rules. And those fiscal rules is that we won't borrow for day-to-day spending. That would be irresponsible. But we will also get debt down as a share of GDP. And as I said just earlier on, debt is now twice as high than when the Conservatives came to office. Then subject to those things, we will invest in the green hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, offshore wind, tidal energy, small modular reactors, all of those things that we know we need to do if we are going to get the jobs and the investment in Britain, get down people's bills, and also meet our commitments to getting to net zero. I'm really excited about the opportunities, but we have to do it in a way where the numbers add up.
Georgia, thank you. Let's move on to Doug in Beaconsfield. Hello, Doug.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Hi, Doug.
Hello. Hi there. You've probably heard about this already, but my life has been destroyed by the loan charge. An HMRC continually harassing me for more than £100,000 over the past 12 years, to the point where my marriage has blown up. I'm now having to sell my home, and I had considered at one point taking my own life. In the recent loan charge debate in Parliament, cross-party MPs criticised government and HMRC, and the current Labour government position was that the Morse review mustn't be the last word on the subject. With over 40,000 unresolved cases and a risk of more people taking their own lives, will you ask the government why they came up with a law to ignore rich promoters linked to the Conservative Party and instead go after those they missold to? And will you commit that if Labour win the election, you will announce a genuinely independent review and seek a resolution to the whole loan charge scandal?
Doug, I think you spoke to us, didn't you, on the evening of that debate in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago, and I was so struck by what Doug had said, and you can hear the emotion in his voice, that I wanted him to speak to you. So this is not a spontaneous call. We spoke to him a couple of weeks ago. What can you say to offer him any words of comfort at all?
So, Doug, first of all, thank you for being so brave and speaking about your own experience. I can tell by your voice and the story you're telling that it can't be easy for you to be that honest about your own personal situation. But we know also that you're not the only one in this situation. There are already 10 people who we know of who have taken their lives because of this loan charge scandal. And for people who don't know what the loan charge is, it's when workers, often contractors, were encouraged to participate in a scheme, and then years later, in many cases, were told that that scheme was not lawful and are now being pursued by the HMRC, often for tens of thousands, in your case for £100,000. And that's money that frankly, most of these people don't have, because we're not talking about the biggest earners here. We're talking about ordinary people on ordinary wages, but who were contractors and were encouraged by their accountants to participate in these schemes. And you're absolutely right, Doug, that HMRC seem to be coming after the people who were missold these products rather than the people who were misselling them. And that is a real scandal. Now, my colleague, I think it was Darren Jones.
When you say mis-selling, let's be clear, HMRC approved these schemes.
No, absolutely, yes.
And they were using them themselves. That's the irony of this.
Yeah, and my colleague Darren Jones, who spoke, I think, in the debate that you mentioned, Doug, and Iain as well, that he was really clear in that the way that HMRC is pursuing this money is just not right. That the government did a review, but it's clearly not good enough, and the way that people are being treated is not acceptable. We continue to press the government to look at these cases and to ensure that the HMRC are more proportionate and don't pursue people who cannot afford to pay for a scheme that was approved by the HMRC. And we'll continue to do that. And look, I really hope that by the election, the government has listened to people like you, Doug. But if they don't, it will fall to Labour to make sure that people like you and many, many others as well are treated with some respect and some leniency.
How can loan charge victims be confident that the Labour Financial Secretary to the Treasury will not be hoodwinked by HMRC in the way that the last 5 Conservative ministers have been, who've all gone completely native and see this as a genuine tax avoidance when anybody who knows anything about it can see that it isn't? I mean, this is the Post Office, and it could be the Post Office writ large, couldn't it?
Well, look, Darren spoke in that debate, so he spoke in Parliament and made that commitment. If Labour win the election, he will be the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and I will be the Chancellor. And we've made those commitments, as has my colleague James Murray, who would be responsible for this, with the Minister responsible for tax in government. And I think you're right, Doug, to talk about, who are the real culprits here. It's the people who missold products, and people like you are the innocent victims in this sort of war of attrition with HMRC now.
Would you give a commitment to have an independent inquiry? Because the government's one, the Morse review, was effectively the government marking its own homework, a bit like the Post Office did.
We have called on the government to do that inquiry. We hope that it won't take as long as getting to the next Labour government.
But if it does?
But if it is, yeah, we will do that.
An independent review.
But let's put the pressure on the government to do this now, because with a lot of these things, it's the government just push things into the long grass, and we must encourage them to act, because many people like Doug have waited too long
I
for this.
accept that, but I think a lot of people listening to this, and this will go all over the internet, I can assure you, I think they would want to know that you're committed to, if it isn't sorted out by the election, an independent review, but rather than HMRC marking itself.
Yeah, we will do that review, but I hope that the government crack on so that people like Doug and many, many others do not have to wait that long.
Doug, I hope that's reassuring for you. Thank you very much indeed for phoning in again. We'll come to more of your calls in just a moment. It's 19 minutes past 7.
LBC this morning on Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Should we continue sending money to a United Nations aid agency that would appear to have included staff who took part in those terror attacks by Hamas?
This is an allegation by Israel. Do we really trust Israel?
Well, UNRWA have fired people, Davis in South Woodford.
We've got to isolate Israel. We've got to isolate Hamas. We've got to step back. And Israel needs to know that the UK doesn't have its back anymore.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7.
With EDF, helping to cut carbon and cost for everyone.
Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC.
Picture
22 minutes past 7 on LBC. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, is with us taking your calls. And the next call is from Tom in Peterborough. Hi, Tom.
Oh, mate. Yeah, evening.
Hello, Tom.
Basically, evening. Yeah. Having a good night. Basically, my question is, how do you expect to improve public services unless you tax the rich? And this is considering that after 1945, after the war, we were in a lot more debt in proportion to our GDP after the Second World War and borrowing loads of money off the Americans, that we built the NHS and all that council housing. Because, I mean, the situation's pretty dire. I mean, I'm living with my mum and dad, and I'm 32 years old, and I used to be homeless as well. And even under a Labour government, I was homeless as a child. So, like, we need a serious council house building project. We need investment in NHS. If you're going to do that, how do you expect, if you're going to continue the fiscal plans of the Tories, the fiscal I can't remember the word, but yeah, the strictness. Well, like, how do you expect to see it about? Are you going to raise taxes on the poor or the rich? And I think it's
Rachel.
Well, thanks very much for phoning in, Tom. And I was actually out in Peterborough on Saturday of this week campaigning for Andrew Pakes, who's the Labour candidate there, and looking to win that seat back at the next general election. And it was great to be there with him. Look, it's really important to recognise the state that public services are in after 14 years of Conservative government. And we have made a commitment to invest in our public services from day one of an incoming Labour government. So we've said that we would get rid of the non-dom tax status, because if you make Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here, and with Labour you will. And we would use the money from that to have free breakfast clubs at all primary schools, more appointments, 2 million a year in the NHS, as well as 700,000 additional emergency dental appointments. As well as that, we have committed to putting VAT and business rates on private schools, and the money from that would go into state schools and young people, the 93% who are at our state schools. And we've committed to cracking down on the scheme whereby private equity managers don't pay the proper taxes on their bonuses. And if we do those things, which we will, then we can have an immediate injection of cash into our schools and our hospitals.
But comparatively little, though. I mean, it's not going to be a revolution. I mean, if you add those things together, what do they come to? About 4 or 5 billion?
Yeah, they do, but that is 4 or 5 billion pounds that's not currently being spent on our public services. It's asking those with the broadest shoulders to pay a bit more to get immediate money into our public services.
But if you want to radically reform public services, you're going to need a lot more than that. And Tom's point is that you should be taxing the rich.
So obviously, the non-doms and the private schools and the private equity is asking those with the broader shoulders to pay a bit more. But in the end, what we've got to do is to grow our economy. Because if you look today, the tax burden is the highest it's been in 70 years, and it's forecast to go up in each of the next 5 years. So this government have taxed an awful lot, but what they've failed to do is to grow the economy. And as a result, we don't have the money for our public services. Other countries, the US and elsewhere, are growing significantly faster than the UK. And that means that they have the money to invest in their public services. And so that's why our plan to get Britain building again, including the 1.5 million homes in the first Parliament that we've committed, Tom, which I hope would make a difference to you and your family. And I think at the moment, if you're 30, you're more likely to be living at home with your parents than you are with a partner. That's a massive change in our lifetimes. And I would like to see more people like Tom being able to get on that housing ladder. And that requires building more homes, backing the builders, not the blockers, and bringing stability back to our economy. If we can do those things, we'll both be able to improve living standards and have the money that we need to invest in our public services.
But there are things that you could do that I think would be quite popular. I mean, putting taxes up is never popular among most people. But you could, for example, put another couple of bans on council tax for much bigger houses, so the rich would pay more for those. George Osborne, in his podcast with Ed Balls, was saying that he thought about doing that in 2016, but David Cameron wouldn't let him because he said it would be described as a mansion tax. But you could do things like that, which would take the burden off lower council taxpayers, for example.
Well, look, I think that the most important thing and the number one mission of an incoming Labour government is to grow the economy, because the last 14 years, our economic growth has lagged close to the bottom of the league table of other similar developed economies. And compared to the previous 13 years when Labour was in government, growth has been significantly lower, 1.5% per year on average the last 14 years, compared to 2% a year in the 13 years preceding that. And if you can grow the economy, and that is why all of our plans are focused on unlocking that business investment to grow our economy, then we can improve living standards and have the money for our schools, our health service and everything else.
Than other European countries since COVID. This year, I think our economy is going to grow more than Germany or France. How can you guarantee that it would grow even faster under a Labour government?
Well, the economy is flatlined this year.
But it is in most European countries.
Well, and if you look at the US, their economy is growing strongly. And if you look in the last 14 years, I think we've been in the bottom third of the league table of developed economies in terms of our growth rates. And look, my ambition is for so much more than that, because I go around the country and I see fantastic businesses doing brilliant things, entrepreneurs, working people working their socks off, and yet our growth rate is lagging behind our neighbours and our competitors. And I want to turn that around. And that's why we've committed, for example, to turn the apprenticeship levy into skills and jobs levy to help businesses train up the people they need to do the jobs that they're creating. It's why we've committed to big reforms to get Britain building again, whether that is energy infrastructure, transport or housing that Tom has spoken so powerfully about. It's why we've committed to being a pro-business party, to encourage that business investment here in Britain. And we've got our business conference this Thursday, the biggest ever business conference that the Labour Party has ever held. And the reason that's important is that we've got to encourage businesses to invest and create jobs paying a wage that you can support a family on here in Britain, because too many businesses are looking elsewhere for investment opportunities today. And I want those jobs here in Britain.
You have been very successful, both you and Keir Starmer, in getting business on side with Labour. I mean, I don't know how many you've got coming to this conference, but I suspect it's quite a few hundred.
We've got 400 coming in the day and another 200
including presumably your new defector, Richard Walker from Iceland, who was going to be a Tory candidate, but when he didn't get a seat, suddenly decides that Labour's the best thing since sliced bread. Am I being cynical?
Well, look, Richard wrote in his own words today why he's backing Labour. I think Richard, like many businesses, traditionally saw the Conservatives as the party of business. But if you look at the chaos and the confusion over the last few years, businesses, like working people, are looking again at Labour, and they see under Keir's leadership a changed Labour Party that is pro-worker and pro-business, because the only way to be pro-worker is to be pro the businesses.
But Tom would like you to tax these people that are coming to your conference. He'd like you to tax them so his life can get better.
I think it's important that we have a fair and a progressive tax system, but the best way to grow our economy is to get businesses to invest in Britain. And what we've seen the last few years is companies move away from Britain to list on stock exchanges elsewhere, to move facilities elsewhere, and I'm sick of it, because I want those jobs and I want that investment here in Britain.
So the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago reported you as saying that you wanted to cut tax for top earners. Were they right?
I want taxes on working people to be lower right across the income distribution. As I said to Georgia earlier, I'm not going to make any promises that I can't keep. Fiscal responsibility for me comes first, but I do think that taxes have got too high.
But surely tax cuts for lower paid people have to take precedence over tax cuts on richer people.
Well, look, I want taxes to come down on working people. People who go out and work hard for a living should be able to take home more of their own money. And what you've seen with the Conservatives' tax plan is that by the end of this Parliament, the average family, on average earnings, is going to be paying £1,200 more in tax. That means less money for the things that we enjoy doing.
Depends on the budget, I suppose, doesn't it? We might come on to that in just a moment.
Well, that's under this government with their plans.
We have to go to the news. Tom, thank you very much for that question. It's 7:32 News Headlines with Amelia Cox.
A former director of the CIA has told LBC UK-US sanctions on Iran won't make much difference. John Brennan has also warned a major war could engulf the Middle East following a drone strike on a US base in Jordan. Leicestershire Police is being investigated over reports of alleged attacks by Valdo Calicani weeks before the stabbings in Nottingham. The force has referred itself to the IOPC over accusations made in May last year. And Lawrence Fox has lost his libel case with two people he referred to as paedophiles online. The former actor was sued by a former Stonewall trustee and a drag artist following a row on Twitter in October 2020. LBC weather, heavy rain at times for parts of England, Wales and the far south of Scotland tonight. Drier but cold in the northwest, lows of -4 degrees.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
How will people fall in love with the railways if their journey is disrupted by industrial action?
Straight to the point.
People would rather go to the dentist than vote Conservative.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Well, these are your candidates who totally disagree with you.
Listen on your radio and Global Player, the official LBC app.
Rachel Reeves is with us, Labour's Shadow Chancellor. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask her a question. Text question, no name on this one. Given the devastation that more council cuts will bring to millions of lives, why don't you pledge to bail out Labour councils who refuse to implement the austerity resulting from Tory funding cuts? Didn't we go there in the 1980s, I seem to remember?
Look, I recognise the huge pressure that local authorities are under, including in Leeds, where I'm a member of Parliament, where government funding has been cut to the bone these last few years, and there's very little space to make further cuts. I do welcome the fact that the government last week announced some additional funding for local authorities, but it is a drop in the ocean compared to what they've lost. But look, the truth is, sorry, we don't know your name, but the inheritance that the next government will have, whoever wins the next election, is going to be one of high taxes, low growth, and public services on their knees. And that goes for schools and hospitals and local authority services, whether that's parks, libraries, or indeed children's services and adult social services services as well. And I've got to be honest, we are not going to be able to put everything right straight away. We've got an immediate plan to put money into our schools and our hospitals, but then we have to grow the economy. And that's why Keir and myself and Angela Rayner as well have set out plans for exactly how we will do that. Plans are drawn up with business leaders and working people to unlock the growth and the investment that we need to have in our economy so that we can have the money to once again invest in our public services that have been devastated by Conservative government.
But aren't you effectively telling the social care sector, well, you just have to like it or lump it for the next few years because we won't be able to do anything for you until the economy starts growing?
Well, look, I think that it's not just about money. There's also reform that is needed in our public services. And, you know, I know from talking to the team at the hospital in Leeds that there's a real problem in hospitals with both the sort of front door and the back door. That there's a problem in people being able to get to a GP and having the referrals into hospital services. But then I think it's something like a third of beds in hospitals are people who should be sent back home or into a social care centre.
What you're saying is that's not going to change in the first few years of a Labour government.
Well, no, what I'm saying is it's not just about money, it's also about reform. Now, Leeds Hospital were doing this really interesting thing that they were funding people that leave hospital and go into social care. Now, that's not what their money is supposed to be for, but actually it ended up saving them money because it's cheaper to have someone in social care. So we need reform in public services as well as money, but to have money to do all the things that we want to do, we've got to grow the economy. Good jobs, paying decent wages across all of the economy.
That was her message.
Well, look, her message was we are going to bet the house on big tax cuts without saying where the money's going to come from. And you know, Iain, that I always say that the fiscal rules take precedence and I will ensure...
You do always say that many times on this programme.
Yeah, and that is the difference.
Okay.
That Liz Truss was willing to make unfunded commitments. I will never do that.
Heather's in Birmingham. Hi, Heather.
Hello, nice to talk to you.
Hello, Heather.
Hello, Rachel. I remember Rachel Reeves stating last year that Labour would like to raise the minimum wage to £15 an hour. Is that still something Labour would be doing?
Well, we would like the minimum wage to be a real living wage, and we would ask the Low Pay Commission that was set up by Tony Blair in the last Labour government to see how we can get there so that more people, particularly on low incomes, have money in their pockets. It's not something we would be able to do overnight. I know that many small businesses would be very concerned about a big leap in pay on top of all the other costs. But Labour's New Deal for working people makes that commitment to turn the minimum wage into a real living wage, but also to give greater security to working people, for example, by banning zero-hour contracts and banning fire and rehire, because those things, I mean, obviously take-home pay matters, but one of the things that I'm most struck by when I talk to people is how the insecurity of work is the most debilitating thing of all, because often people don't know, you may know this from your own experience, Heather, you don't know how many hours you're going to be doing this week compared to the week before, and it's very difficult to pay the rent or the mortgage and keep on top of bills when you have no security at work. And that's why we've said that from day one, workers should have rights in the workplace, and some of those, I think, really appalling practices like fire and rehire and zero-hour contracts would go.
But isn't it up to political parties or governments to direct the Low Pay Commission? Like I think it was a manifesto promise in 2019 that minimum wage would be £15 an hour. You could actually say in your manifesto, which I know you're not going to write on my programme, as you constantly remind me, but you could say, well, we want the minimum wage to go up from what it is now to £13 in year one, £15 in year two. And people understand that. But just to sort of say, well, we want it to go up, well, I'm sure everyone would like it to go up.
So we would say to the Low Pay Commission that we want the minimum wage to become a real living wage. But if you did that overnight, that'd be very difficult, particularly for some small businesses. And what Tony Blair and Gordon Brown did when they created the Low Pay Commission was to give them a remit to have a minimum wage below which nobody could fall, but also look at the impact on the wider economy. But we would give a new remit, which is to make the minimum wage a real living wage, but then give the Low Pay Commission the duty to take us on that journey there, looking at all those different factors. It's really important, though, to just add this, because I want the economy to grow. I've said that a few times this evening. But it is important that as the economy grows, that ordinary people benefit from it. And one way that ordinary people will benefit from economic growth is being paid a wage that you can afford to live on and having security at work. And that's the quid pro quo, really. We say to business, we're a pro-business party. We are going to unlock those opportunities, take away those obstacles that are stopping you from growing and investing. But in return, we want working people to be paid a wage that they can afford to live on and end some of those insecurities at work that are so debilitating for so many working people.
Right, we've only got a few minutes left. I want to squeeze in two more questions. One's from Andy in Warwick, who says, will Labour accelerate school rebuilding? The government will only rebuild 50 per year, which leaves hundreds of thousands of kids in dangerous and inappropriate buildings for years to come. How many more schools will Labour build? I ask, as my school is affected by RAC, and I still have no idea what the solution will be or when it will come. Meanwhile, the kids are in temporary classrooms all over the site.
Andy, I really feel your pain. When I was at secondary school, our sixth form was 2 prefab huts in the playground, and our library was turned into a classroom because there were more students than space. And it was that experience of growing up in the 80s and 90s that got me involved in politics in the first place. Because
I had that experience in the 70s, and that's part of what got me involved in politics, but for a different reason.
Yeah, well, my whole childhood from 1979 to 1997 was under Conservative governments, and they didn't care much about schools like mine and families like the one I grew up in. So that's why I got involved in politics. And to hear the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, say recently that kids are happy being taught in porter cabins, it really does make my blood boil, because I wasn't happy in that porter cabin. And
so what are you going to do about it?
Well, look, we will set all that out in the manifesto. But Bridget Phillipson, Labour's Shadow Education Secretary, has been taking the fight to the Tories on this, has been asking them to reveal the full extent of not just the RAC in schools, but other issues with school maintenance. The Tories cancelled building schools for the future when they came in 2010, and many of the schools that have got RAC in today are ones that would have been rebuilt under Labour's plans, and it just shows how short-term their approach is. Well, we will set out all of our funding commitments in the manifesto, but look, frankly, after 14 years of Conservative government, we're back where we were in the 1990s, with hospital waiting lists going through the roof, people waiting in trolleys in corridors, and kids being taught in porter cabins, which is what I experienced when I was at school.
Right. Let's go to Mark in Lewis. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
Hello. Question for Rachel. Why will university tuition fees continue to be free of VAT, whilst under your plans, private school fees will not?
Thank you very much for your question. Look, on the private schools, we know, and look, Andy's question was really pertinent on that our state schools are in a mess after 14 years of Conservative government. You've got crumbling buildings, you've got kids back in porter cabins, you've got class sizes that are going up, and you've got unqualified teachers because of the recruitment crisis. And I'm determined to fix that. And we are going to do that in part by asking private schools to pay VAT and business rates. And I think that's the right thing to do. It's similar to what Tony Blair did in 1997, where he got rid of the assisted places scheme at private schools and put that money into reducing class sizes for 5, 6 and 7-year-olds.
But this will actually increase class sizes, because there will be thousands of kids who go to private schools whose parents are not rich, who will end up going into state schools.
Yeah, well, look, the average fees at private schools today are £15,000, and the average wage for a working person is about £30,000. So most people on ordinary wages cannot afford private
I accept
school
that, but
fees.
there are many people who are
Institute...
not on high wages who do send their kids to private schools because they're not happy with the state schools in their particular area.
And that's why we want to improve the state schools, and every penny from this will go into our state schools. But the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who obviously are highly respected when it comes to issues of public finances, have done a study looking at what they think will happen if business rates and VAT are introduced. Now, there's no reason why the schools have to pass this on. In the same way that public services have been asked to make efficiencies these last few years, private schools could do the same and not see those fee increases. Well, because they haven't had the austerity that public services have faced. In fact, the fees at private schools have gone up by much more than inflation these last 14 years.
But they might argue so of their costs.
But by much more than inflation. So private school fees have gone up by more than the average prices in the economy. And so I'm pretty certain that they can make efficiencies, and that parents, especially those on medium earnings or not hugely wealthy people, won't have to see those fee increases passed on to them. You make the point about university finance. The university tuition fees are, just over £9,000 a year. And there's no VAT on them. But on the other hand, you could say that 20% of it was VAT and the rest of it was... But it's all money that goes back into the state. So I don't think that analogy quite works.
Rachel, thank you very much for joining us again. I don't know whether we're going to see you before the budget or maybe on budget day or whatever.
We did do it, didn't we, on budget day or the day after once?
I think we should do it again. How about that? I'll get my people to talk to your people. It's a day,
but you probably have to talk to my people.
Thank you very much indeed. Cross question coming up next on LBC. We have with us Gina Miller, leader of the True and Fair Party, Sir Alec Shelbrooke, who is a Conservative MP, Kim Johnson, Labour MP, and Sebastian Payne from the Onward think tank. They'll be here to answer your questions after 8. The lines are open 0345 6060 973. It's 7:49.
This is LBC.